Ooh, darlings, I am ready for my close-up. I am a multi-bodied, multi-locationable drag queen who sings songs online and offline in a society that is increasingly experienced through screens. In a society that is ever more narcissistic, I am everybody's selfie and no one's. I compete with my own image and I usually lose.
Instantaneous culture. Instantaneous
Sergina.
culture. Why wait for what you wish for? Why wait for what you wish for?
Yeah. Hello, Portile audience. This is Victor Sternweiler. We are talking to Sergina, which is a art persona figure embodied by the people that I'm talking to, Elly, Clarke, and Vladimir Bjeličić, and some others, but today we're talking just to them. Why this is happening now is that a couple of years ago in Munich, I saw a performance of Sergina at the Academy of Fine Arts. And now in these days of COVID-19, I was talking to a friend about all this Zoom performances and artists now thinking about how we can still be productive in a way. And I thought of Sergina, and funnily enough, I happened to find Sergina on social media 3 days before there was another Sergina performance. So I happened to attend that, and we will be talking about what Sergina is, and we will be discussing specifically two performances like that Munich performance, which was half online, half on site. And this Munich performance, why it really lingered in my mind back then was the aspect that after it was over, I thought whether institutions are preventing online performances. But we will talk more about that later. The second performance was only online, participative performance that we will see also excerpts of. Yeah, we will discuss that and you will see.
Thanks, Victor. So as I was saying, it was really nice to do that performance, and the one that we just did in end of March, just mid-lockdown. I'm in the UK, Vladimir's in Belgrade, I'm in London, and then to get your email and to know that you had already seen that performance as well, because sometimes it feels, especially as I was living in Berlin then, I'd moved, you sort of sometimes feel that you leave half your practice and life behind when you move, and especially when you then also kind of go exclusively online. And,
how many emails did we exchange already? Like 15?
I know. All of them were lovely to get, all of them. There are rather few people who would have seen these early performances really, who would also have seen this one. So that was a real kind of coincidence that in a way that you'd seen that and then you thought of my work and then there I was doing this performance.
I was thinking of like, what is Sergina? Is it a persona? The persona has this connotation of like, personality and the psychological thing, but I think it's kind of an art figure, and which is embodied by you and Vladimir. And the drag thing, for me, it works as a kind of a uniforming, disguising gender, drag as a non-binary uniform, let's say, because even in schools where you have the skirts and the ties, and with this drag thing, it's this non-binary uniform.
No, we just actually spoke about that just before you joined, right. To say that in the beginning, because it was interesting watching the Munich performance, because it is much more drag then, although it's still very much focused on the computer and things, but the outfit and all that stuff is much more kind of traditionally drag, and now it feels like what we're doing, it's more about dragging, that drag. So rather than it being dragged up, it's more around the body being dragged through these different technologies and platforms and things.
Yeah, you told me that. I find it very interesting that our data, a version of ours, may be like a simple version of ours, is kind of moved back and forth, maybe as data on some computers by governments or Facebook or anybody.
Exactly.
So I would be really happy if you would elaborate this a bit more.
Yeah. Do you want to, Vladimir? Because I feel I've just said
Well, yes, I can kind of extend that. And when we first started collaborating, I think we spent much time speaking about what drag is. During this past 5 years, I mean, as we are collaborating, we kind of came to the point, I would say, to fully deconstruct drag as some kind of a performative technique or an autonomous performative genre, so to speak. A myriad of methods that anybody can use to drag
Exactly.
oneself.
Yeah, it's a bit like a kind of open, we were thinking of it as a sort of open source identity, a kind of shareable technology that you can put on. And also as you said, Victor, like a kind of uniform or / even a camouflage. And, you know, in this world of being tracked and traced, it is really interesting that actually Facebook has no idea who Sergina is because she's played by so many different people. So it cannot tag, it never correctly tags Sergina. It even tried to tag a dog of Sergina the other day. That it sort of messes up with the facial recognition. So yeah, you're right. And it is very much the idea of, I suppose, dragging towards where people, this is a place that you can come and slightly have a break from being perceived in your usual subjectivities in whichever way. And also with the potential of technology to even speak with a voice that doesn't sound like yours and all sorts of things. So, yeah.
So I think that I would very much agree with you. In some way, we're using drag as a vehicle for some kind of social and political articulation. And in order to achieve such an articulation, we are actually very much relying on poetry. Through these really elaborate and nicely put lyrics and those songs that Sergina usually performs, we're actually tackling really important subjects such as alienation, in contemporary, I would say, capitalism, etc. You know, on the other hand, there is also this constant topic of borders, I think. Very often, Elly and myself, we're not able to physically perform at the same venue because, you know, we're actually, you know...
Precarious life conditions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, only once have we ever performed in the same place, and that was in Brighton last June. It was the very first, and even then, we actually didn't know what to do with our physical bodies being in the same space because they never had been.
It was really strange.
So what did we do? We put ourselves opposite each other on the same table with a rule that we could not have no eye contact at all, and our communication nevertheless was still through Zoom.
And I would just put here like a little funny anecdote. So the two of us met for the first time in Berlin a couple of years ago, and the moment we met in flesh, it was like completely insane. You know, you couldn't believe that you're actually seeing this person in flesh. So I think that encounter of ours also nicely illustrates what we are doing, you know. So
you met in Berlin? Like after you were doing Sergina, like after you started Sergina?
Yes, so we had been working together for 18 months before we met in person.
Ah, really?
Yeah, so we never met. And also right now, I'm also doing an EP with somebody I've never met. So I'm working on music with a guy called Stuart Wood, who's working with me on 3 new songs that I'm doing. Yeah, and also, so the original performance that I got Vladimir involved for was called Sergina's Stimulatingly Sexy Simultaneous Simulation of Herself. You've probably seen the bad YouTube streams on my YouTube channel, Sergina's YouTube channel. And at that point, it was 5 different people working across 4 different time zones: New York, Brooklyn, Belgrade, Berlin, Birmingham. But also Vladimir, you haven't met. You've met a couple of the other Serginas now.
Yeah, I met actually just 2 Serginas out of, let's say, 4 or 5.
Or 5 or 6, because we got new people in. And
so Sergina is somewhat like a band with a group outfit and with changing members.
Exactly. And she's also, what I wanted to add to the drag thing, that she's a way that sort of deconstructed is just, she's actually a pretty bad drag queen, you know. Her costume, she only has, most drag queens will never be seen dead in the same outfit twice. She only has
one.
Yeah, and the makeup is bad, but the makeup kind of partly makes it difficult to tell, like, if she's a real drag queen or a fake drag queen. But then what is a fake drag queen? You know, the idea of the faux queen. How do you talk about a faux queen if you're talking about gender in this way? You know, is a faux queen a woman pretending to be a drag queen? Well, maybe she's less faux than a man being a drag queen, you know, so.
Yeah.
So all in all, what we wanted to kind of briefly say is that actually Sergina is indeed an ongoing project, which, you know, is based on love, I suppose, and support and solidarity, because it wouldn't be possible if there wasn't enough understanding, I would say, from both ends or for multitude ends, you know, in order to produce
solidarity towards whom?
Towards, I'd say towards the project, really.
Yeah.
Because it was just towards, so Sergina emerged as a sort of party creature in Berlin.
Right.
So what happened, the story of Sergina was I started going out in drag. Originally as sehr gay, as Sergey.
Yeah, exactly. I read that.
Yeah, exactly. And then Sergina. And then I had all this, I was doing music in a band and I wrote loads of songs with them that was all about technology. And then the band disbanded and I realized those songs needed to continue. But that I, as Elly, was not, they needed to be pop songs. Me as Elly was not going to be that kind of pop star to be able to carry those songs. So I just brought Sergina in to be the kind of spokeswoman for these songs.
Now a woman, you said.
Spokeswoman, yeah. She goes by she, but she'd say she's a woman, but it doesn't really matter what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I brought her in. Yeah, and I never really initially just to do music videos. And then I started performing and realized something else very interesting happened when I performed, that my identity became completely kind of unreadable in a way that actually was quite interesting to talk about in relation to technology, because it's always been in relation to the mobile phone, to the selfie, to the digital body that is better looking and more agile and doesn't need to sleep and all the rest of it. Yeah, so it was an experimental kind of bringing together that.
Yeah, like exactly. So Sergina on YouTube performs every time somebody clicks on a video.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well put. Yeah. And there's also this, I think, really important aspect of, in terms of where Sergina came from, I would say that this is a really intriguing thing, because when we spoke with Elly's PhD, you know, we came to conclusion that actually Sergina is actually part of this lineage, I would say, with early cyberfeminism and early internet art. Elly has like a really significant experience. She spent a year or a lot more in New York.
Yeah, in the early 90s. I don't know if
the early 90s, right. So I think, yeah, I think that's really relevant also in order to fully understand, you know, where she comes from and which, how should I say, corpus of ideas she, you know, kind of inherits and then deconstructs or translates further in regards to contemporaneity. So yeah, I think that's also really, really significant thing.
An extract from this performance here. Unfortunately, we can't make it big, but hopefully you can see it. And so this is the performance that Victor saw, which was actually 2016. So it's what, 4 years ago now, nearly.
Oh, 4 years ago, wow.
I know, well, 3.5, I suppose. It's maybe interesting actually just show right at the beginning, sort of the entrance. So what you see here as well as the YouTube live stream, this was going through at that point. It wasn't Zoom. I don't think Zoom was even invented yet.
I think it was Google
it was
something.
Google Hangout. So there's Sergina, which is played by me at this point. And it was I'd never performed in such a space before, normally at sort of nightclubs and things like that.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share with you some rather intimate data about my algorithms, orgies of algorithms, in fact. But anyway, how is my makeup? My boys are handsome, aren't they?
So that might be a good point. So then she goes on to kind of start the lecture, and then it transpires that actually she's not alone. And I think it's here that
right.
Well, maybe it was a bit later.
Waiting for blue.
This was it. So then there's Vladimir, who's dressed the same on the screen, but then it was also interacting with a previous video that we'd made where we were wearing the same outfit as well.
Waiting for recommendation. Waiting for recommendation. Waiting for a boy.
So this is all from a poem. And then I think I was going to go forward to here, where actually then she gets up and dances. So here you can see Vladimir in the background.
What's important is not a body's identity, but rather its connectivity, not its mobility of location, but rather its interface and mobility. The network is seductive.
So we'd also incorporate the words of theorists
The
and
network is seductive.
put them directly into the word, into the mouth of Sergina, which is often done, and the credits are kind of delayed until the end. So with this, we had just a bit of Sherry Turkle, and I think Donna Haraway was in here, and
Yes, and
Elizabeth
Clarke, as far as I can remember.
Ellerat was in there. So we kind of, in a way, the idea is that Sergina almost doesn't invent anything new herself. She's kind of like a product of the internet, where the words that so almost the only thing she writes from fresh are the lyrics for her songs that also within the performances are then read back almost as conversation. Sometimes plays a song, sometimes lip sync to, sometimes dance to, very kind of draggily, but sometimes just almost what she watches herself. I thought it might be interesting just to show here where you sort of see the different perspectives of the laptop. This is the laptop view. You want me to stop it?
Yeah, maybe we stop this. And
I just do.
Opera, with this drag aspect, I'm not going to comment that much on that. In this context, I'm really so crazy about this video, like this video literacy, which is kind of like what we called in the past amateurish filmmakers.
Yeah.
Because we're like with this ready-to-use devices that everybody has, and you're producing this.
Yes, yeah.
I was there attending this, sitting in the audience. I was having basically this view that this camera is having. So I'm seeing the space that we're in projected on the screen, and it's Google Hangouts, and it's a live conversation between one Sergina body and another Sergina body. But it was done so nice. I couldn't really tell whether it was live or whether it was like the Vladimir's part were pre-recorded and just somebody clicked play in the right moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that was indeed our attention, to kind of blur the line between the pre-recorded material and the live material. And the important element of this drag persona character, or however you want to call it, is an image, and the way image is being manipulated with, so you're basically constructing the character and alter ego with plenty of images. And you cannot trace them very often. You cannot say from which source the image is coming.
Well, there's sort of no original. And
right.
I mean, the fact was actually a lot of this script was actually taken from a previous script we'd made only about 2 weeks before or something, very soon, which was the two of us in the same drag, which also we interacted with. And I'm doing that also still now with this idea of you don't, really to point out the uncertainties of technology and of documentation altogether, and not quite knowing what you're seeing. And I think particularly now in these crazy COVID times, all of us are feeling that much more.
I never attended in the audience like a late night talk show, but it was like this late night talk show type of setting where people are sitting in the audience, then there is something happening in front of you, then there is a camera, but actually this person who's performing, he's not actually performing for the audience being there, he's performing towards the camera. So it's kind of a film production set. So you're in the audience, but the performer doesn't pay attention to you. He doesn't talk towards you. He's performing towards the camera. And in real time, you see what the output is. This output being preserved and later broadcasted like you would do on TV. So in a way, a video production set where the shooting was organized as a happening.
Yes. So, that's interesting. Yeah.
So basically there was this performance which was part of the production, and then the other pieces of the production which were happening online. So it was not like a stage performance. It was a video production with live editing. Let's put it like this.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But was it live streamed back then?
This was live streamed onto Facebook. Yeah, so it's still there. And this is actually the link here to the live stream on Facebook, on YouTube. Yeah, and I think it's also about, who is the, you have to sort of make a choice between either to be an online audience member or offline. And
exactly.
maybe, yeah.
Because back then I really thought like whether this performance was somewhat kind of distracting what was happening on screen in a way. So you're in a set, you're not able to kind of comprehend what the output is. Like you're watching a video and then something is happening on stage on top. And luckily enough, Sergina decides to show everything on YouTube.
No, exactly. No, everything is open source.
Right.
Ah, yeah, this was the series. I think Marietta Kesting invited you?
She did, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason she knew about me was because one of her students actually made a film about me and Sergina. Really nice film, actually.
It's a really sweet thing.
Yeah. And so she made this film for the course that she was doing.
Anyhow, what was really interesting back then was the fact that did Elly really need to come to that place? Or could this performance happen from anywhere and an institution could still be interested to do this and pay for that matter?
Yeah.
Or are institutions reluctant to have something like that? Do they want to offer their participants who are really there something like a show gig? By their policy, they could support this more, saying like, okay, you're having a lecture performance. So if you could do it online, why don't you do it from home?
Exactly.
You would still get all the reimbursements that that would come along with even traveling to that venue.
Yeah.
Or that's the perspective from the institution. So maybe they're kind of prohibiting this. Maybe there are budget structures where you say like, okay, that's a traveling budget, that's like the artist fee and so on. But also maybe artists are reluctant doing this because they want to see places, they want to go places. Do you think with artists this is taken into account, or is it like a lack of media literacy? Are they reluctant to do it online? Or, for example, with many of these lecture performances, sometimes I think like, okay, if you really need somebody to be there, somebody else could perform it, so it's not necessary.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's also, I mean, that is the whole thing about Sergina, like that she is a transferable identity. Yeah, well, I mean, it's something I've been pushing for a long time also because the climate emergency actually was partly behind the kind of construction of Sergina as being someone that other people could play, so that I personally would not need to fly across the world to perform her, partly for my own budget and health and all the rest of it, because then if I didn't have to be sponsored by someone who could pay for a flight for me from very far away, she might be able to kind of get around more. But also very much for the climate emergency. And actually last summer in June last year, I did a performance remotely from 4 a.m. my flat, 4 a.m. in then Brighton where I was living, with one person I had met before in 2012, who then in turn also invited another person in. And that was at a conference about embodied cognition. And that was in Melbourne. So interestingly enough, for the first time in my life as an artist, probably ever, I actually am in a situation now where the invitation of to do a presentation at a conference is enough for me to have my flight paid for. So I would have actually had my whole flight paid for, hotel, all the rest of it. But I could not stomach last summer the idea of getting on a plane, flying right across the world for a 20-minute presentation that could, as you say, exactly have been done online. And what was interesting was the interaction I had with the conference organizers, where they would say, well, whilst we very much understand your stance on the climate emergency, this is about embodied cognition. But then, of course, you do.
Yeah, exactly.
So they had to admit that actually, but then they said, well, yeah, but you have got two people who are going to play in your place. But what was really nice about that was then after my university, my PhD funders had said, yes, we'll pay for you to do that. I then turned around and went, well, how about instead of it costing this many £1,000, it will just cost this, but the money's going to go to paying the artists who are going to perform instead.
Exactly.
So instead of that money going to airlines, which are also choking up the world and the air and all the rest of it, not only went to these artists, but it also meant these local artists had the chance to kind of gate crash this conference that was happening down the road from where they live. So it was really interesting to do it. And also, as I had this conversation with Vladimir recently, that performance was the first time that I was the one at home when someone else was actually in a kind of conference situation.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
normally with me and Vladimir, it's normally me being, especially since we've been doing more of these sort of academic-y style laptop performances, which has been at things like Transmediale, at the Barbican, at a conference. So that's normally then been me. And increasingly it ends up with just all that you see really is that you see this person who is a little person sort of sitting at a laptop where, there's less and less to see for the person viewing. And it's much more about what's happening on the screen. So you're very dependent on projectors and things like that. Should we look at the other performance now, Victor?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
it wasn't really planned, that performance that we just did, the digital one, because I'm doing my PhD now at Goldsmiths. And that was actually supposed to be a physical installation where I was going to install physical objects and probably do a performance as well, but, use a space. And then, of course, as it was approaching, it was supposed to be the week earlier, actually. And Vladimir and I were rehearsing, knowing that it was very unlikely people would be able to come.
Yeah.
But still thinking I'd have access to the space. So we were thinking about having a kind of live streaming into an empty room by itself, as the installation, something like that. And then in the end, we couldn't do anything. So we were just in our bedrooms doing it from there. It was, I don't know quite what stage it felt like you were at in Munich, but certainly here, the lockdown had only just started 2 weeks before, which is why we had to postpone it as well. So it feels like now people have got a bit more used to the new normal, not that it's any less awful, but right then it was this, it felt quite scary, didn't it, Vladimir, to do a performance. Now everyone's doing performances left, right and centre all the time, but then it felt a bit maybe attention grabby, maybe a bit risky.
Right.
But it sort of ends up being a mirror back to the self, really, because I mean in every Zoom chat now we spend half the time looking at ourselves and going, oh my God, when am I going to be able to get a haircut?
Yeah, exactly. So I was watching it and I saw the people and I pretty much enjoyed it. I felt like being really part of it, although I was not part of it. And the others, they were kind of observing the others, observing themselves, having others observing them. And it was like this parallelity of everything, which was very cool.
Oh, I'm glad that you felt that you were kind of participating just through watching. I mean, it was really like, I don't know if you had a chance to have a look at that little article that I wrote, but it really was interesting, that response that came straight after of the participants saying how much they enjoyed it and they felt really connected and they felt that they weren't on their own anymore. You think about art gallery situations, people pretty much have been doing social distancing for the last 100 years in galleries. I mean, no one talks to anyone really. There's always this sort of like haughty distance. And then in the Zoom, by contrast, people were chatting to each other on the chat and that sort of thing. So there was actually, in some ways, more interaction between them. Vladimir and I were unaware of this during the performance because we couldn't keep a track of the chat and everything else. But it was only afterwards when Rue, who was acting security, who's my partner, said there was this chat going on, and we could see what had happened. It was quite interesting to see. And then the other people reported, saying they were chatting about what's going to happen next, and now our data is going to be sold back to us, and making these kind of predictions.
Just wanted to add to kind of extend what you just said about gaze, as a matter of fact, because I think what we actually achieved, and that just crossed my mind at this point while you were kind of describing what was your perception of the whole thing, I just kind of realized that we actually managed to deliver some sort of a collective gaze, if you understand me, because you do have this traditional first construction of the male gaze within this kind of art history canon, and then when it comes to this kind of a second wave of feminism and the feminist intervention, you have this kind of introduction and proposition of the female gaze, the woman who is actually observing the male and objectifying, etc. And I think that with our performance and in regards to the media, as you said, we kind of propose some kind of another view, collective gaze. I mean, it's kind of interesting to kind of think about it,
Like a sort of collective narcissistic gaze.
Right,
Which
right.
is what technology engenders.
Yes.
That's what we've been dealing with
Yes.
Sergina for a long time, the narcissism of the technology.
Right. And in that sense, I think that maybe this is pretentious to say, but I think that perhaps we managed to, at least for a while, perform really, really as a collective body. And that is an idea that we kind of explored for some time, Elly and myself. We're constantly speaking about how you're able to create an entity that is able then to connect with anybody, regardless of gender, race, or any other category, so to speak. So yes, I think that's really interesting, and perhaps when we were performing, we were completely unaware of that, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think because we were being so strict, we didn't really imagine that people would be feeling, I was worried they might feel a bit, because in Brighton, they were scared of us. They were scared about coming through to the back room where we were. They were afraid to kind of confront us. And so that's also this interesting thing where...
scared. What do you mean?
They felt kind of threatened by coming in where these two kind of half dragged up drag queens were sitting at computers. But we thought we could show you a video, 2-minute video of the performance that we did in Brighton, upon which the digital soap opera was based, or was a rerun. And so this performance was actually a digital rerun of a performance we did together. It was actually the first ever and the only ever performance that Vladimir and I have actually done together in the same space, which took place in Brighton last year in June. And the photos that you see behind both me and Vladimir are from this performance that took place there. And for that performance, we actually used a similar situation where we were basically like Sergina agents. So we were in this kind of low-key drag, just the paint and wigs as well. And we would fill in we'd ask the audience that were assembled in person what they felt, these questions. And these questions were actually also taken, like almost everything else that Sergina uses in her performances, they were taken actually from an open call from an Istanbul queer collective that was in 2017 or something like that.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
What we wanted to do was the idea, so it's really about the body and the data and which one is more valuable. And it was very much sort of parody of really this feeling that... Yeah, you can carry on, Vladimir.
Yes, I think that was our way to grasp, this kind of a corporative realness of our everyday communication taking place online, because we actually acted as call center operators trying to kind of harvest data throughout the performance. So it was a durational performance lasting 4 hours. And it had a couple of segments. However, through all the segments, we were harvesting data, as I said, without looking at each other.
Anyway, I think that sort of shows, probably enough, that we had this setup we sort of split the gallery into two. So we had the kind of Sergina agents. We were thinking about Sergina as a kind of big sister in a way, gathering data. So Sergina as an entity is sort of changing. So in a way now she's controlling us.
Yes.
Which is also, I'm more interested in this idea that a kind of whether our relationship with technology is consensual or not, which it often isn't because of our data. So in some ways we might be entering the domain of grappling with that with Sergina herself, or she is with us. So we really did that same performance of gathering data. People in the gallery could answer the questions in person to us, as you saw the people looking a bit scared and kind of hearing their answers. They could also answer on their phones by following a QR code. They could also answer on an old-fashioned kind of paper form. And it was all kind of, all around the performance were these instructional videos kind of explaining what people needed to do and things like that.
What was really interesting for me with this performance is that there was this Zoom invite that you were sharing on the Facebook invite.
Right.
And then you could click, and then I don't know how it worked that 9 people were selected to participate on that. So maybe we can... This is on YouTube and everybody can see it actually.
Yes.
So maybe you say something about like the procedure, like the agenda of this performance in the performance, I'm really always reluctant to call it a performance,
Yeah.
Because because with films we don't call them performances that were recorded, we call them films. So
true, but
although somebody performed there, we call it differently. So maybe you just briefly summarize what was supposed to happen there.
Well, I think it is a performance because it was live. So I think performance is more to do with liveness than presence. And I think that's the shift that we're going through, is where we're finding togetherness through temporal co-presence rather than physical. And I think that's been happening already. In a way, I feel like we've been in training for this situation for ages that we're in.
At some point we see like the overview of where everybody's on there.
Oh yeah, I'll find that. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. So we just do it where we're dancing together.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
So this is the dance. Or is it here?
Right.
Exactly. So there were like all these people participating in this performance, and there was this, let's say, program that was pushed by Sergina.
It's part of the...
Exactly. So there was, and all these participants that were randomly chosen, so it seemed at that point.
Yeah. Well, they weren't. They actually weren't chosen. They just came. Yeah. Afterwards, we really thought we should have probably cheated a bit and actually asked them. But we were so kind of busy with the whole thing, and it was just quite an overwhelming time. And these were just random people who turned up.
Exactly. So these were these random people, and you were, amongst others, asking them to kind of to dance. And there was Sergina and Sergina. So
yeah,
like,
exactly.
I am appearing now, like twice. So, but there were different bodies, and you had like funnily the security. Did he or she mute anybody, or
they were there really to manage the Rue Malhaber, who's actually a filmmaker and my partner actually. It was quite funny because they were just in the next room, but it was really to manage the waiting room and just to kind of keep people in check. Also number people as numbers as they come in. So you can see here that they have numbers. So this stage here where we did reading this poem with everybody was actually we felt that
for his mother.
We asked people to just intuitively read
for a reply.
Read the lines that they wanted to read.
Waiting for text message.
And it's really charming because sometimes the voices overlapped.
Yeah.
And you receive some kind of a really intriguing formation.
Yeah.
The lyrics.
And it also resembles, for me at least, these things that I'm familiar with CNN. You would have a conversation, you would call in other people in this live broadcasting online, and then you would vote whether you want a new government or not. And at the end of the show, we will see the results.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what was interesting around how people answered these questions was actually how honestly they answered it. So something else I can show actually, which I prepared earlier, are some of the answers from... Here are the responses. So basically we were using also Google Forms, right? So we're using the tools very much that are at everyone's disposal, which are highly problematic as well for many reasons that we all know. For instance, so here's the questionnaire, 45 responses. This was during the performance in June, which lasted 4 hours in 4 acts. So this is the first question, what do you feel? So you can just see desire, confused, hungry for action.
Okie doke.
Yeah, well, that was a mission.
We're talking for how long now?
Very long time.
3 hours.
2 hours.
No, 2 hours, sorry.
2 hours, wow.
Yeah, that's long. Yeah, great. No, thank you, Victor. It was a really interesting discussion.